welcome back. I'm Melissa Pineda, and today I will be discussing the book Scientific Secrets for Raising Kids Who Thrive by Professor Peter Vishton. So this was published in 2014, and I'm not sure if it's available in hard copy or in an actual physical copy. I listened to this on Audible. It was a great read, though, a great listen. It was just, at first I wasn't sure because it really starts with infants and then babies, and my kids are a little bit older. My youngest is 6, so I thought, okay, it's, a little too late, but no, that's not the case. He actually talks about older children as well, and it's just very interesting in general and great advice to pass on to friends too, that have younger kids or that are expecting. So why would you want to read this? Because all of the stuff that Vishton talks about have been kind of tried and tested and true in terms of helping your kids not necessarily get like a step ahead of other children, but just in terms of like helping you do certain things differently that will benefit your kids, that will help their developmental process, and that will help you as a parent. There are some things that I'm going to talk about that I was like, okay, you know what, I'm going to try that instead of possibly threatening or bribing my kid. So why don't I dive right in? Before I do, let me just say that if there's anything that you hear that you like, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you. All right, so Vishton talks about, he starts at the beginning. So when you first have a baby, he talks about infants. He gives you just some facts. Lots of studies have been done on sleep. So for the first month of a baby's life, 16 hours of total sleep, including naps, is the norm. Then he says 14 hours a day until the end of the first year, and then 12 hours a day through the end of the third year, and then 10 hours a day through age 12, and then 8 to 9 hours a day for older kids after 12. So after 12, 8 to 9 hours is totally normal. And sort of you can kind of see where your kids are at and if that kind of fits with what he's saying. All kids, he says, goes through a picky eater phase. I'm happy to hear that. Most kids grow out of it. Most. Still waiting over here. He says that you should introduce your vegetables before fruit. Babies will obviously like sweet tasting things more than anything plain or bitter. So some things that I found were like, okay, I already knew that. But then he talks about things like very interesting. Okay, don't introduce a new food to your kid when they're under the weather. If you want to make them try a new vegetable, don't give them snacks anywhere close to dinner time. Like make sure they're a little hungry so they're at least willing to try. If they have a sugary snack an hour, he says, before, it will ruin the chances of them taking the new food favorably altogether. So Vishton introduces all sorts of studies throughout this book, which are all very interesting, and one of which was babies from different cultures, like all around the world, were examined in terms of infant-directed speech. So baby talk. So when you're talking to a baby versus another adult. And so he's saying, like, it's a universal phenomenon all over the world, across all cultures. Babies prefer when an adult talks to them like, "Hi, baby, how are you?" versus, "Hi, baby, how are you?" Which makes sense. Obviously, infants and babies respond more to a smiling face than one that's frowning. Things like this. He talks about sign language for babies. Apparently, it was a belief that this delayed speech at one point, and he's saying this isn't the case. It doesn't delay speech, but you can oftentimes teach your baby to sign earlier than you can actually teach them to speak. And it doesn't have to be the actual sign for a milk bottle. It can be whatever you want it to be. But yeah, he's saying this is like a growing phenomenon. Keep in mind, this is published, 2014. But in any event, so signing for babies, you can just make anything up, and your baby will learn to do this quite possibly earlier than speaking. And it doesn't delay the speech, he says. He says, don't hate your kids. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. He said the response to that is violence. Maybe not back at you, but someone at school, someone else will receive whatever you're giving to your kid. Kids observe and follow what their parents do. So the whole do what I say and not what I do doesn't work, he says. He talks about the different kinds of parenting. Okay, so there's authoritarian parenting, there's permissive parenting, and there's authoritative parenting. So authoritarian parenting is very controlling and not very warm in terms of their interactions. Permissive parenting is very warm and not controlling, seemingly unaware when their kids are misbehaving, rarely imposing any limits on their kid. And then there's authoritative parenting. And before I explain what this is, I want to say he doesn't pass a judgment. Like, he says basically, like, all parents mean well. He'd like to believe all parents, love their kids. But there is one form of parenting that is just better than the others, and it's this authoritative parenting. So authoritative parenting is a warm and controlling type of parenting. So it's where the parent is sensitive to information and requests from their kids and quick to explain their behavior to their children as well, in terms of if they're reprimanding, for instance, they're explaining something as opposed to just, it's because I say so. Like, it's not that. You're actually explaining to your kids why something is happening, why you're doing what you're doing. And Vishton says that this type of parenting works best in terms of moral development. Like, if you want your kids to be honest, they will internalize moral standards better if you assume this type of parenting. So he talks about intelligence testing as well, SATs for instance, and he says that if you believe you can do something, you will perform at higher levels. And the reverse is also true. If you don't believe you can do something, then it pretty much won't happen. So this is in the domain of education and cognitive development. So it's all about the mindset and what you encourage your kids to kind of say about themselves too. Vishton talks about how to boost your child's mental development. He says, like, some things where when the child is very young, like under 1 year of age, he talks about things like making little mitts for your babies with Velcro on it and then putting Velcro on objects. So like before they can even grasp things themselves, they can stick their hand on something and like Velcro to Velcro. And so they learn how to grasp things earlier this way, and all sorts of studies he lists, like with respect to like eye coordination and different like things that we don't even realize like babies already understand. They just can't communicate that to us. So all sorts of cool studies are performed, and he references them, and he only references them if they've been around for a while or if they're performed with like a large test case sample. He doesn't talk about like a one-off study that, he's not sure if it works. Like, he only mentions these things if he's like, yes, this has been proven. And he wants us to be aware of that too. Like, if we hear about a study, like, he kind of talks to you as though like this is how you can kind of look for what would be a good study or how are you going to spot a good study versus one that's not, or one that hasn't been done more than once or a handful of times. So anyway, he talks about musical instruments. That is huge in terms of boosting your child's mental development. Also playing with wooden blocks, more so when they're young. You're not going to give your 7-year-old that necessarily, but he says start earlier with the wooden blocks. So studies have been done, and this shows that it basically stimulates mental development. Exercise is a huge one. Praising your kid for hard work and not how smart they are, he says. Talk to them about how intelligence is malleable and not fixed. So it's not like you're just born this way and okay, you're born with, you're smart at math versus you're not. Like he says, you teach your kids that it's like a muscle. Like, the more you practice math drills, the better you're going to get at math. So he also talks about homework. He says the more a parent helps with homework, the worse the child actually does at school. So he's not saying don't help your kid with homework, but, perhaps like be around, just don't necessarily like sit with them and be over their shoulder while they're doing their homework. You can't just give them the answers because they're going to have to do this work on their own at school without you. He says praise them, but don't help them too much with their homework. Praise them for their hard work. Encourage them to keep going. If they're really stumped, obviously that's different, but like don't do the homework for them, essentially. And make sure that they take breaks throughout their homework. He said this is really important. Frequent breaks. So this will really help their concentration and their motivation. Vishton says that make sure your kids have basically a very good understanding of fractions by the age of 10. Studies have shown that this determines their abilities in math later on in life, and fractions come up in the real world all the time. So he gives us parents examples on like how to do this, with your gas tank, for instance, how to ask your kids questions when you're out and about, to just show them that math is everywhere and to help them kind of practice as well. He talks about the advantages of the second language. He talks about how bilingual kids, there have been so many studies, they tend to be more creative and are able to switch from one instruction to the next very quickly. So sorting blocks, for instance, based on colors, and then all of a sudden they're asked to sort blocks based on shapes, and the bilingual kids are a lot quicker at switching from instructions than kids that only speak one language. Self-control also might be enhanced for bilingual children, better memory, more self-control. So there are a lot of studies done on this, and he encourages us to have get our kids speaking a second language. Something else that's interesting, many studies have been performed on this, but apparently you are less likely to suffer from dementia later on in life if you speak a second language. There's a later onset of mental decline in people that speak another language. He says trilingual people, there's even more of a buffer in terms of mental decline, specifically with respect to Alzheimer's. Learning a language at a later age, even in adulthood, has these benefits. So there are more people actually on this earth that speak English as a second language than there are people that speak it as a first language, as an aside. He threw that in there. I thought that was interesting and also makes sense. He talks about how background TV is not a good idea, and you obviously have to be very careful as parents what we let our kids watch. And he's saying he would recommend no TV at all until your child is 2 years old. Like don't even put it on at all until they're 2. Vishton also talks about different studies that were performed in terms of kids and musical instruments, as discussed, but what I wanted to say as well is, so not all kids want to play piano or violin. Like, it's not fun, especially when you're learning and you're not necessarily good at something right away, right? And so he's saying, if you have like a 7, 8, 9-year-old, you can speak to them about how, yes, you don't want to practice 20 minutes of your piano, but just get it out of the way, do it, and you will see the benefits of this. Like, the more you practice, the better you get. And then when they start to see this, then the child will realize that, like, the hard work pays off. They're actually, getting better at this. So just as a little aside, my 8-year-old didn't want to do figure skating this year. And as a Canadian, I do believe you should know how to skate. So I told her she was doing it anyway. And last year, she spent most of the time on the ground, on the ice, just refusing to do anything. But I guess she did learn something, because this year she was crying, didn't want to do it, steps on the ice a couple months ago, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, I have better balance this year. And oh, okay, something she retained from the year before. And all of a sudden, different ball game. And she was happy to be there. No more crying beforehand. Now, this isn't going to always be the case. I'm sure now that I've said that, next weekend she's going to cry. But the point is that when your child starts to see there's some improvement there, they're like, oh, okay, you know what? Like, my hard work or muscle memory or something ends up playing a role, and I'm getting better, and then that will encourage them. It'll be like cyclical. So he talks about that, and that's the example that came to mind with one of my children. So he also talks about the fact that conflicts are not inherently bad. They are problems to solve. And we have to help our child understand this. Like, not to shy away from conflict, but to sit down and figure it out. Figure it out that he walks you through this too. Like, okay, you might say to your child, okay, so what happened there? So why did Jill, like, what was her argument, or why did she want to play with the toy, and then why did so-and-so react like this? Like, almost like figuring out the conflict after the fact and going over things from different perspectives. So if you can kind of go over conflict and conflict solutions with your child, they'll be better positioned to do this on their own, and they won't shy away from conflict, because conflict will be everywhere. It's I mean, it is everywhere for the rest of our lives. We have to deal with conflict, but it doesn't have to be unpleasant, or it doesn't have to be a bad thing. He also talks about attributing your child's success or failure to how hard they try. I really like this one. There's so much research done where kids that were hard on themselves were told to repeat to themselves, I didn't get that one. That means I need to try harder. And just kind of putting that in the kid's head, like, you didn't do well, not because you're not able to, it's because you need to try harder. So to kind of change the internal dialogue, change what they are telling themselves. And this will make it easier for them going forward, and easier for them in terms of how to deal with failure in their lives. I'm going to leave it there. There's so much in this book and so many studies he references. And depending on the age of your child, like, you're going to want to focus on, one part of the book over another. It was an excellent read. I really took away a lot of points from it. And I think all parents can benefit from studies like this and books like this. So if there's anything that I've said that's interested you, please check it out. And also don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And thanks for listening. Until next time.